strengthening Medicare, about protecting middle-class families, or if they were just lying. The American people will find out in a few hours. Republicans have said they don't want to cut Medicaid. Today, we'll give you the chance. Republicans say they want to prioritize the middle class. Today, we'll give you the chance. Our amendments will give Republicans so many chances to defend Medicaid and SNAP and good-paying jobs and clean energy that if they say no, they'll regret it long after this debate is done. Finally, to my Republican colleagues, let me offer a warning in good faith. You all know that Donald Trump makes things up. He has no regard for the truth. When he talks about this bill, he's lying. When Donald Trump says this bill won't cut Medicaid, he's lying. When he says this bill will grow the economy, he's lying. When he says this is the best thing Congress could pass for our country, he's lying. So what are my colleagues on the Republican side going to do? Listen to someone who just makes things up? Listen to someone who peddles lies and fantasies? Follow Donald Trump off a political cliff by passing a bill that will be disastrous for the people back home? Or will my colleagues stand up for the American people? Stand up to protect health care, good-paying jobs, middle-class families? The American people will not forget what Republicans do in this chamber today. Yield the floor.
To my colleagues, it's going to be a long day, and I just want to remind everybody the rules of the Senate, Rule 19, no senator to debate shall directly or indirectly by any form of words impute to another senator or other senators any conduct or motive unworthy or unbecoming of a senator.
President.
Recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we're going to vote here real soon on a bill that's been worked on for many, many months. And I want to start by thanking the staff on the committees, the relevant committees, the floor staff, everybody that's been around that has to put in the hours and get us to where we are today. They are extraordinary people who are very dedicated to their jobs and to public service, and we're grateful for that. And I will say, too, because we went through the reading of the bill, which the Democrat leader just pointed out was important for people to hear, through the middle of the night, and, I don't think there was a big American audience for that. I think a lot of people were at their jobs, working their shifts. People like nurses and firefighters who are going to benefit under this bill. To think that they were sitting there in their jobs watching the bill be read on the floor for endless hours in the middle of the night, I'm not sure what that achieved, but I'll tell you what the senator said, the Democrat leader, back in 2021, when a Republican senator required that to be done. He said this, and I quote, "It will accomplish little more than a few sore throats for the Senate clerks who work very hard day in, day out to help the Senate function," end quote. And those clerks are here today, and one of the reasons that we tried to give them a break last night is because they had to stay here the night before to read through the bill. In the dead of the night, nobody watching, but they did it. So hopefully they got a little bit of rest last night so we can start this off. Mr. President, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was one of the most successful economic policy pieces of legislation in history, and the data bears it out. You look at what happened after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, unemployment hit a 50-year low, poverty levels at record level lows, and incomes grew. Incomes and wages increased, most among lower income Americans. We started to narrow the wage gap as a result of the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So what is this about? This is about extending that tax relief so the same people that benefited from it back in 2017 and for the last 8 years don't end up having a colossal, massive tax increase hitting them in the face come January 1. Now, who are those people, Mr. President? It's people, it's families making less than $400,000 a year on whom the bulk of this would fall. $2.6 trillion of this tax hike that they're supporting would hit families making less than $400,000 a year. It would hit small businesses to the tune of $600 billion in tax increases. These are pass-through businesses, the businesses who are out there creating the jobs every day. If we don't do this, they're going to face a $600 billion tax increase. That's what we're talking about. And if you want to put it in plain terms, if you're one of those families making less than $400,000 a year, the child tax credit would be cut in half. The standard deduction would be cut in half. And you wouldn't get the benefit that many taxpayers are going to get under the legislation that we're going to be debating today, which would allow tips to go untaxed, allow overtime to go untaxed. So those nurses and those firefighters that are working the long shifts, not watching the bill be read here on the Senate floor, actually get something out of this that makes their families more able to cope with the challenges that they face every day. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a massive, by any stretch of the imagination, success. And probably no better evidence of that than the fact that the Congressional Budget Office, which has been quoted a lot here in the last few hours, actually underestimated the amount of revenue that would come into the federal government by $1.5 trillion. Estimated the amount of growth, underestimated, the amount of growth in the economy by 5.4%. Dramatically underestimated what it would generate in terms of revenue and what it would generate in terms of growth. So let's just say what this is. And by the way, billionaires next year will pay the same tax rate they're paying this year. The people who are going to get hit with a tax increase if we don't do something are those families making less than $400,000 a year, who are going to see their child tax credit cut in half, their standard deduction cut in half, their rates go back up to what they were in 2017. And in my state of South Dakota, the average family is going to pay $2,500 more if we don't do something to extend the tax relief that was passed in 2017. Now, the other thing that Democrat leader got and talked about is, they're going to be cutting Medicaid. Mr. President, there are a lot of government programs that haven't been looked at in a long time. We all acknowledge that 75% now of federal spending is what we call mandatory spending, entitlement programs, things that Congress doesn't annually appropriate for. And it continues to grow at an uncontrollable rate. In fact, the growth in the rate of Medicaid spending in the last 5 years has been 50%. That's not sustainable. We know that's not sustainable. And in the time I've been here, we have never, ever done anything to reform and improve and strengthen these programs that are growing at an unsustainable rate that will wreck our economy and wreck our country if we don't start making some changes. And so, yes, there are some improvements and reforms to Medicaid to make it more efficient, to make sure that the people who are supposed to benefit from Medicaid do, and that it doesn't go to people who shouldn't benefit from Medicaid. Now, most of the increase in spending in Medicaid has been in what we call the expansion population. And that's the number of people out there for whom states get a 90% reimbursement from the federal government. And so that has grown dramatically. And what does that represent? It's a lot of able-bodied adults, people who should be working, people who are perhaps, don't need to be getting the assistance that's designed for people who are disabled and low-income elderly and pregnant moms. That's what Medicaid was about. And states have, with the federal government, a partnership shared for the years at a traditional rate. The expansion population is 90% paid for by the federal taxpayers. And so what do states do? They game the system to get more federal money. They add more people to the rolls. And so you have people on the rolls today who are here illegally, you have people on the rolls here today who are not eligible for this program, and you have people here today for whom there is, in that program, for whom there's no work requirement. And so what this does, it makes some reforms, one of which includes work requirements. I don't think that's a novel concept. It certainly isn't a concept that I think most Americans would disagree with. In fact, it was a Democrat president. Back in the 1990s, there was something called welfare reform. Bill Clinton, a Democrat president, proposed work requirements for welfare recipients. And you want to know something? The work requirements in the Welfare Reform Act, passed back in 1996 and signed into law by Democrat President Bill Clinton had stronger work requirements that are included in this bill. Stronger work requirements in a bill passed, signed into law by a Democrat president than what's in this bill, and proposed, I might add, by a Democrat president. So that's one of the reforms that we're making. And these are reforms, Mr. President, are going to make this program stronger, more effective, more efficient, improve it in a way that it gets the assistance to the people for whom it was intended and not to people who are gaming the system. And yes, we address the issue of provider taxes, which has been abused. No question about it. It's another way to leverage federal money, get more federal money into the state coffers, and the states have used it for things not just to cover people, but also for other reasons. And you like states like New York and California who've gamed the system. So the whole issue of what we're doing with the Medicaid program is to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse, make it work in the way in which it was intended to cover the people for whom it was intended, and to make sure that we have work requirements included there. To the current policy baseline. Everybody got up last night and they were clamoring and yelling very animated speeches about how the Republicans they're using a current policy baseline. How could they ever do that? Well, you know what? Back in 2012, President Obama, and one of the people who was working for him at the time, named Jeff Zients, used the current policy baseline to make permanent the Bush tax cuts. And what he described it, Jeff Zients described it at the time, he called it the alternative fiscal scenario. That's how they explained to the American people. And then he translated it and said what it is, it's a current policy baseline. So the Democrats have used this before. In fact, they you could argue, pioneered it. But current policy baseline is something that's been used by both sides. So it's a little, spare me the hypocrisy and the noise about current policy baseline. Alternative fiscal scenario, he called it, and then he went on to explain current policy baseline. Finally, with regard to the issue of the deficits, it is rich to hear Democrats all of a sudden concerned about debt and deficits. Really? I mean, I've been here a long time, and I've not been involved in a single spending debate and fight in which Republicans were trying to spend less and Democrats were trying to spend more, with one exception, and that's national security. Democrats are always willing to cut defense, but never want to cut anywhere else. That's my experience. And I think it was borne out a couple of years ago when Democrats had then what we have now, which is unified control of the government. They had House, Senate, and White House, and so they had an opportunity to use reconciliation, which they did twice. One of the bills cost $2 trillion. The other bill cost $1 trillion. And it was all spending. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a fundamental difference between us here. And I understand that. We have different views about the role of government. Democrats like government. And one of the things we know about government is when you send money to Washington, money is power. And when you send money to Washington from the American taxpayers, that means Washington has more power. It has more control. And Republicans fundamentally have believed that it's better if you allow the American people to keep their own money, that you distribute power out of Washington, D.C., back to state and local governments who are closer to the people and can make better decisions that are more informed by what's actually happened in their individual states. And so when we use reconciliation to keep taxes low, and by the way, that's all we are doing here is extending current tax policy. We are preventing over a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people. And when you vote against this, that's what you'd be voting for. Now, a good example of this spending issue was the 2011 Budget Control Act, in which, authored by a number of people, including Senator McConnell, they created a super committee, equally represented on both sides of the aisle. And they met for a long time to try and come up with some ways that we could come up with ways to reform entitlement programs. Of course, what happened? They deadlocked, because every Democrat voted against it, every Republican voted for it, and it even included some revenue increases, which is something Democrats are always for. So getting up and talking about deficits all of a sudden, honestly, is kind of mind-blowing coming from this side of the aisle. What we are doing here is extending existing tax policy, using a current policy baseline which was used by the Democrats, President Obama, Jeff Zients, no less than a little more than 10 years ago. So, Mr. President, it's time to vote, and Democrats will get a chance. They'll offer all their amendments, and they'll attack this thing as cutting taxes for billionaires. What we are doing here is extending tax relief for the American people, keeping their rates low, making sure they don't have their child tax credit cut in half, their standard deduction cut in half, including new provisions that provide more relief for working Americans, which is what President Trump campaigned on. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, lower taxes for seniors, for Social Security recipients. These are all targeted at working Americans, working families. That is first and foremost about what this is about. This, Mr. President, will make this country safer, stronger, and more prosperous. It addresses military modernization. It addresses securing our border. It addresses restoring energy dominance. It extends tax relief for the American people so they can avoid a $4 trillion tax increase at the end of the year. And yes, it includes some savings associated with reforms that are made in a way that targets assistance from federal programs to where it was intended to go. And yes, we have work requirements that were initiated by Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration during welfare reform back in the 1990s. Only, I would say again, they're not as strong. The work requirements included in that legislation back in the 1990s, what we have in this bill, the work requirements here, are not as strong. Mr. President, let's vote. This is good for America. This is good for the American people. It's good for working families. And it's been a long debate. I know people are weary. But at the end of the day, we want to get this done so that this country is safer and stronger and more prosperous, not only for today, but for future generations of Americans. That there be 2 minutes equally divided prior to all roll call votes in relation to calendar number 107, H.R. 1.
Without objection.
Well, they have to make. Okay, so,
I recognize the Democrat leader.
well, we're about to vote on something that we have never seen before in the Senate. And rather than be honest with the American people about the true costs of these billionaire giveaways, and by the way, I didn't hear Donald Trump campaigning on tax breaks for billionaires, which is the main thrust of this bill. He wouldn't tell them about that. But Republicans are doing something the Senate has never done before, deploying fake math, accounting gimmicks to hide the true cost of the bill. Look, Republicans can use whatever budgetary gimmicks they want to try and make the math work on paper, but you can't paper over the real-life economic consequences of adding tens of trillions to the debt, and that's what this does. Make no mistake about it, and it's the way we've always calculated things. So, to vote yes on this, make no mistake about it, my colleagues, will in a dramatic way further erode the Senate. I urge a no vote.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from South Carolina.
as to being weary, I feel great. I've never felt better. I've been wanting to do this for like a long time, and our ship's about in. So I'm very happy, Budget Chairman. As to what we're talking about right now, we're not overruling the parliamentarian because she said it was up to the Budget Chairman to set the baseline. The chair made a decision that was right. The budget resolution gives me the authority that we all passed to do this. In 2008, Senator Conrad changed the baseline to accommodate the Farm Bill, and the Republican former chairman, Judge Gregg, said the chairman of the Budget Committee declared the new baseline under a new budget. The budget chairman has a right to do that. That's what I'm doing. In 2022, Senator Sanders directed CBO to write a new scoring rule, changing the baseline to get Head Start money into the budget. So this has been done. In 2012, in a bipartisan fashion, as the Bush tax cuts were about to expire, they extended them using current policy. Back home, what I'm trying to do, and I'm very happy about it, is make sure the tax cuts don't expire 10 years from now. I want you to be able to go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow knowing the tax cuts you have today are permanent, unless one day my Democratic colleagues change it through resolution, through reconciliation. So if you're for open borders, this bill is your worst nightmare because we control the border. If you want higher taxes, which apparently they do, this bill is your nightmare because we're going to keep tax cuts low. If you want to have a weak military, this is a bad bill for you because we give the military $150 billion. If you think Washington should control spending, this is a good bill for you. If you think the government is running just perfectly and nothing can be changed, this is your nightmare. So for those big liberal folks who I like personally, this bill is a nightmare for you. This bill is good for the American people who work hard. People got to work when they can. That's a good thing. If you want taxes low, we deliver. If you want to secure the border like President Trump has done, we make it that way forever by having $175 billion spent to get it controlled forever, not just right now. This is a good bill. We're doing nothing that we haven't done before. Vote yes to uphold the ruling of the chair. We're starting a process that is long overdue in this town, controlling spending, keeping taxes down, making the military strong, and finally looking at a way to get efficiency in government. Vote yes.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair stand as the judgment of the Senate? The yeas and nays were previously ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Thank you. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Thank you. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Blunt-Rochester. Mr. Booker. I got you. Mr. Bozeman. Thank you. Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono. Did you hear that? Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Ms. Lemons, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Lankford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Budd, Cornyn, Cotton, Crapo, Cruz, Ernst, Graham, Grassley, Haggerty, Kennedy, Lankford, Lummis, Marshall, McCormick, Moody, Marino, Mullen, Paul, Risch, Schmidt, Sheehy, Thune, and Tuberville. Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Bennett, Blunt Rochester, Cantwell, Cortez Masto, Hassan, Heinrich, Kane, King, Markey, Merkley, Ossoff, Padilla, Rosen, Schumer, and Smith. Mr. Justice? Aye. Mr. Kramer? Aye. Mr. Lujan? No. No. Mr. Whitehouse? No. Mrs. Blackburn? Aye. Mr. Kim? No. Mr. Durbin? No. Mrs. Capito? Aye. Mr. Cassidy? Aye. Mr. Rounds? Aye. Mr. Peters, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. He said, Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Gallego, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mrs. Britt, aye.
Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Warnock? No. Mr. Van Hollen? No. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mrs. Fisher? Aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Moran? Aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Young, aye. Just. Mr. Coons, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47. The decision of the chair stands as the judgment of the Senate.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order for the following senators to be recognized to offer amendments, motions, or points of order, that the amendments be reported by number with no amendments in order prior to a vote in relation to the amendments or motions. Schumer motion, number 1. Motion to commit on health care costs, Markey motion, and then Klobuchar motion. Point of order.
Okay. Without objection.
Mr. President, I make a point of order under Section 313B1B of the Congressional Budget Act against Title VII of Substitute Amendment Number 2360.
Under the Congressional Budget Act and the precedents of the Senate, the chair must rely on determinations made by the Budget Committee in assessing the budgetary effects of the amendment. Section 312 of the Budget Act states, for purposes of this title and Title IV, the levels of new budget authority, outlays, direct spending, new entitlement authority, and revenues for a fiscal year shall be determined on the basis of estimates made by the committee on the budget of the House of Representatives or the Senate as applicable. Unless the Budget Committee, speaking to its chairman, asserts that the amendment causes a violation of the Budget Act, the chair will not so hold. Therefore, Mr. Leader, the point of order is not well taken.
President,
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
I appeal the ruling of the chair, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. There appears to be.
There are now 2 minutes of debate, equally divided.
There are now 2 minutes of debate, equally divided. Senator from Oregon.
I ask the CBO letter of June 29 to the ranking member of the Budget Committee be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
And in this letter, it notes that the baseline was prepared, the alternative baseline, based on a request made by the chairman of the Senate Committee on the Budget. But the letter goes on to say this. The CBO estimates that enacting this title would increase the deficit by nearly $3.5 trillion over the 2025-34 period. Clearly, that amount, done by honest numbers from CBO, exceeds the budget resolution level, and therefore we should not affirm the ruling of the chair. It is said in this ruling, I just heard, that precedent provides a foundation for this. But in fact, the ability of the chair to create a phony baseline has never been used in reconciliation. Not ever. And in fact, the example cited over Head Start, that never appeared in any budget reconciliation. And in fact, that conversation about Jeffrey Zients that we heard from the majority leader, that too was absolutely wrong. Current law was used for estimating the cost of that bill. This
time has
breaks
expired.
the 51-year tradition of the Senate.
The senator's time has expired.
Mr. President,
The leader is recognized. I'm sorry.
Senator from
Minor is
Idaho.
recognized. Sorry.
Mr. President, we're just rehashing the same old arguments, but I want to make something really clear. This Congress, in the budget resolution for this reconciliation, adopted the current policy baseline. CBO scored that current policy baseline. It said that our bill generates a $506 billion deficit reduction. The ranking member for the Budget Committee asked them to give it a new score based on a different baseline, the current law baseline, which says that we have to say that if we don't raise people's taxes, that we're causing a deficit. They said they would. They always do. They give the scores that different members of Congress ask them to give, and they gave that score and said, well, if you raise taxes by $4 trillion, then you will have a $4 trillion increase in tax revenue. That's what the whole debate is about, folks. You can complain and use different words and deficits and all that stuff. There is a CBO score on the baseline adopted by this Congress on this resolution that sets the score at $506 or $507 billion of deficit reduction.
Okay.
Where is it? He has it up here. Just this top, this whole thing.
Okay. The question is, shall the decision of the chair stand as the judgment of the Senate? The yeas and nays were previously ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsa Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mrs. Blumenthal, Mr. Blumenthal,